Okay, this might not be the most exciting way to record a lecture, but at least we'll get the information out there. Okay, going on with chapter 12, which, if you'll notice in Blackboard, if you look under the outline and the number of questions, this is going to be a big part of your exam, especially if you go down to the where we were looking last week with the they have it broken up between your state and national portions. But this is, like I said, this is important, so please don't skim. The workbook that accompanies the book also has an outline of or an activity rather, where you can do a contract. But yeah, agency relationship and contracts, 28 questions. Okay, so moving right along, what is important about a contract? And I drew up on the board the way we learned it in law school, just a little acronyms. O plus A plus C, and that's the money consideration, equals contract. I use K as the abbreviation for that. And the O and A, you have to have an offer. The offer has to be accepted, and there has to be some consideration, some money to create a valid contract. Well, those are just the working parts of how to make a contract. But along with that, you have to have capacity. You have to have somebody that is capable of making a contract. So if you have somebody that's incapacitated or mentally deranged or whatever, obviously they don't have capacity. That's not going to work. But you also have to have consent of the parties, meaning you can't hold them at gunpoint. You can't force them to do something. And it has to be for a legal purpose. You can't make a contract, in the state of Alabama to grow weed or just, something like that. That's going to get you in trouble. So, we've talked about this a little bit in terms of real estate agents and some of the work that they do. What is the difference between an express and an implied contract? And bless your heart, you're the only one here. So.
Express is something that you assume, and implied is what you're told directly.
You got it backwards. Think about express. You expressly tell something. An implied contract, it's implied, so you assume, because I've shown this lady 15 houses and we've done all this stuff, you assume you have an implied contract relation with this person. Where an express is, you got that lady to sit down and sign something saying, I am your agent. So, yeah, express and implied. Let me look back here. And I'm jumping back a little bit. It talks about, I like to read the in practice things that you guys have in your book so that maybe it'll stick. All right, real estate professionals may be permitted by state law to use contract forms drafted by attorneys and provided by their trade associations or employing brokers. A real estate professional cannot practice law unless also licensed as an attorney. The parties to a transaction, including a buyer, seller, landlord, and tenant, always have the option of hiring their own attorney. It should never be discouraged from doing so. I believe the question came up a few weeks ago, are realtors practicing law, by signing those form contracts? But, obviously not, or we'd have lawsuits all the time. But those form contracts were drafted by ERA, Caldwell Baker, whoever the legal department is, and they've got permission, obviously, to reproduce that and to use that. So, as a realtor, you would never want to give legal advice. You'd never want to discourage anyone from going to talk to an attorney, but you certainly have permission to use those form documents. Bilateral and unilateral contracts. Just by the name in and of itself, bi means two, and unit is one. So a bilateral contract means you got to have two promises. Both parties in that particular contract are going to promise to do something. One promise is given in exchange for another. A real estate contract is a bilateral contract because the seller promises to sell and the buyer promises to pay a certain money. So that's where that's an example of a bilateral. Now, a unilateral is a one-sided agreement. And let's look at the in practice. A brokerage lists a property for sale with multiple listing service, the MLS. Any other broker who is part of the multiple listing service may or may not bring a buyer to the listing broker. The offer by the listing broker to share compensation with a cooperating broker is an offer for a unilateral contract. The brokers who receive the offer are not obligated to bring a buyer to the listing broker. But if a cooperating broker does produce a buyer, the listing broker is obligated to share the compensation on the transaction on the terms specified. Now, does that seem real clear? It doesn't, to me, it's yeah, it was confusing at first glance. I was like, what? But a unilateral contract is, nobody on the other side has to agree to do anything. You're just promising from your side that you'll do something. You have executed and executory contracts. An executed contract is one that everything has been fulfilled, promises are done. So an executed contract is when you get to the closing. Everything's done. In the meantime, you've got an executory contract, meaning it's still hanging out there. It's pending. And at the bottom on figure 12.1, you've got some different contract issues. Don't read it across like left to right. They're just 3 separate columns. Essential elements, then you've got different classifications, and you've got discharging of a contract. Now, when I first started, I told you about the creation or acronyms used typically to talk about a valid contract. And in your textbook on page 204 and 205, it specifically goes through the specific elements. What is an offer?
A promise made by one party requesting something in exchange for that promise.
Yes, yes. The offer is made with the intention that the offeror, which is the person making the offer, will be bound to the terms if the offer is accepted. The terms of the offer must be definite and specific and must be communicated to the offeree. So if you make an offer but the other person never knows about it, in other words, if you put a letter in the mail making an offer, you have to show that they knew about it. And then an acceptance is a promise by the offeree to be bound by the exact terms proposed by the